Roll call. Ms. Best? Ms. Aguihide? There. Later, sorry. Ms. Norton Gibbs?
Present.
Ms. Kai? Parks?
Here.
Mr. Shapiro?
Here.
VP Hargrave?
Present.
And President Dr. Howard?
I am present. This time, do I have a motion to go into public comments?
Motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Okay. Residents are requested to state their names, addresses, and subject matter. In the event it appears that the public comment portion of the meeting may exceed 15 minutes, the presiding officer may limit each statement made by a participant to 3 minutes in duration, and tonight we will hold to that 3 minutes in duration. Issues raised by members of the public may or may not be responded to by the board. All comments will be considered and a response will be forthcoming if and when appropriate. The board asks that members of the public be courteous and mindful of the rights of other individuals when speaking. Specifically, comments regarding students and employees of the board are discouraged and will not be responded to by the board. Students and employees have specific legal rights afforded by the laws of the state of New Jersey. The board bears no responsibility, nor will it be liable for any comments made by members of the public. Members of the public should consider their comments in light of legal rights of those affected or identified in their comments and be aware that they are legally responsible and liable for their comments. At this time, do we have any members of the community who would like to come to the microphone? One moment, Ms. Lawler, just give me 1 second. Would you please? Again, in light of our last meeting where we did not hold everyone to the 3 minutes duration for public comments, we will enforce the 3 minutes tonight. We gave everyone an ample chance at our last meeting, but unfortunately we don't want to belabor this, so I'm going to ask, and if we have an extension, we will certainly extend public comment if need be. Ms. Lawler, if you wouldn't.
Thank you. Good evening. Angela Lawler, 54 Herden Street. I wasn't able to be here last month, so I would appreciate a little bit of grace. I'm looking at page 6. For the preschool budget, there's an increase of $3,441,000. I'm curious as to where that's coming from. Can I ask all my questions and then maybe get an answer? Okay. On page 3, I see there's a lot of salaries listed on this page, and I see a lot of increases. 270,000, 338,000, 180,000, 70,000, 90,000, 101,000, 96,000. And this is the general fund, if I'm not mistaken. 558,000, 116,000, 57,000. Now, I'm confused because if we're cutting staff, why are there all these increases on salary lines? It just doesn't make any sense to me. Because as we're telling people that they're no longer going to have jobs, but yet we're increasing the line items, it looks like mostly for salaries, whether it's for teachers or other professional staff, or just the word salaries or administration. Also, I noticed that today there was an advertisement that came out at the end of the day for student workers. Although I'm a big proponent of students working during the summer, and I do understand that, I would like to know where the funding is coming for that. Because just as, unfortunately, ESP members are being told they don't have jobs, now it kind of looks kind of off that we're bringing students in to work in IT and custodial positions when you're getting rid of custodians. I know that this has been a normal practice of the district to bring students in and have them work over the summer. It just doesn't look right to me. So I wanted to understand where that was coming from and the funding for summer school as well. Because we're cutting teachers and we're cutting staff, yet we're still gonna offer summer school grades 1 to 8. High school is understood because I know it's for credit and I know they need it to graduate. But in the elementary school, they do not need it to graduate. And I know we like to push our kids forward that need the extra help, but it just doesn't make sense when we're telling people they no longer have a job. And we're cutting teachers, but you know, it always hits the ESPs harder because we don't make the type of money that teachers make. So you're telling people that are basically living paycheck to paycheck, you no longer have a job, but I see all of this. So that's my time. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. So I guess I'll start with the pre-K budget. The increase so first, just to make the distinction, the pre-K budget is separate from the general fund budget. So they are independent funding sources. With that said, the majority of that $3+ million increase is carryover funds from the previous year. So it's not like, yes, it's carryover funds from the previous year that's a part of the budget. Because usually what the budget consists of is that you get a per pupil allocation. That's usually what the primary source of your funds are in the pre-K budget. Then you get an allocation for your contracted provider. In this case, my contracted provider is Little Bears. So you get an allocation for them. Then there is a general fund transfer to the preschool budget to support that, which basically what that does support is because preschool funds, you can't use them for special education students, but we know that we have, classes where there may be some special education support needed. So in that case, you have to transfer money from the general fund to support that amount in the pre-K budget. And then finally, it's made up of a carryover amount that you may have had that was unexpended in the previous year.
A lot of money, $3 million.
No, it is a lot of money. It's a lot of money, and to be honest, I don't know the full nature of why there was so much in carryover. But the carryover funds are not determined by myself. So what happens is that during the audit, so right now although we're late, we're undergoing our audit for 24-25 fiscal year. So the carryover number is given to us by the auditor. So he looks at the financials and then he tells us this is how much money you had in carryover from preschool funds.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Sure.
So my follow-up question would be if the budget was 6 million last year for preschool or 3 million?
No, it wasn't 3 million. It was roughly somewhere around there, like 5 or
5 million. So out of the
something
5
like
million, we
that.
didn't spend 3 million. So
I honestly,
no,
I
I'm just
have to look at it.
I'm
'cause I
asking
don't
only
know.
because we didn't spend 3 million out of the 5, and now we're bumping it up to 6. If we couldn't spend the 5, how are we gonna spend the 6.5?
Well,
It seems like it's always gonna be a huge
Right.
carryover, which kinda
and to that point, the state discourages carryover. So what they started implementing last year, I believe, is that when you have carryover funds, you get a 25% reduction in your overall budget.
Mhm.
So it's not of interest to the district to carry over such a large amount because by doing so, the budget is reduced by 25% because they started that last year. Before, what would happen is that part of, the logic in having carryover funds is you ensure that you have a buffer to support preschool in the following year. Now that amount is unusually large. I'll
Yes.
concede
Mhm.
that. Definitely will concede that. But as I said, the state is trying to discourage that. So in our budget, we had a 25% reduction of, our overall budget because of the carryover amount.
Are we
Now-
short-staffed at that building?
No, as a matter of fact, what we did this year for the budget, as since you mentioned staffing, at least 4 of the staff at AP Morris they were absorbed by the preschool budget. So what they did was they opened up additional positions,
Mhm.
like 2 positions was just classroom positions, but in terms of true vacancies, they opened up 2 positions they didn't have in the previous budget. So they were able to create 2 new positions, absorb 2 teachers, and then they had 2 openings, and then absorb 2 teachers who would have otherwise been cut because they reduced the amount
Mhm.
of their classrooms.
It's just a huge carryover.
You're right. Like I said, I'll definitely concede that it is a huge carryover amount, and we've tried to our best to allocate the expenditures accordingly, and spend it as much as possible to the benefit of the students. And you said there was an increase in salaries, and you are right. There is an increase in salaries. Part of if you notice that when you look at those lines that you were talking about, that those lines are broken down by grade level bands. So you have kindergarten, first grade, sixth grade, things of that nature. So part of the reason for some of those increases, if you notice the amounts, 90,000, 70,000, 180,000. You can probably tie these amounts to 1 or 2 staff members because part and we had talked about this before, that we started with around 47 positions, and through attrition, consolidation of positions, and transfer, we were able to get the cuts to 21, which is why in some grade level bands, you'll see increases in salaries because we transferred people to those places. But if you notice that while you see like some of the smaller level increases like that, you notice that you have 2 very large decreases in your 6 to 8 grade level band and the 9 to 12 grade level band, which would outnumber the cost of, movement. Because if you look at both of those combined, that's 1.2 plus million dollars with that decrease in overall salaries. So that's that part.
How about the 558 for administration?
Give me 1 second. Yeah, that's a good point. And then a good point that was just made is that, some part of this is going to be a natural increase, just due to the contractual obligations of the CBA. In the CBA, prior to doing any budget cuts, we were looking at like a contractual increase of nearly $1.5 million. So now, of course, it's going to be less than that because we have cuts, but just that in general, it's going to also contribute to the increase in salaries. So on paper, it looks like we have more staff, but in reality, the salary increases are due to movement and obligations of the CPA for contractual level increases. So that's that part. You mentioned did you mention summer school at the end? Yes. Okay. So what we made the point of, you know, last meeting was to say with summer school goes along with our district programming, like as well as curricular programming and anything of that nature. Our approach to this budget was to try to minimize as much as possible the impact to programming, to student programming. And so that was the reason why we tried our best to maintain summer school. And even with that, and from your position, it's a fair question. Even with trying to maintain summer school, we still had to have reductions in what was offered. I believe in the past it was 5 weeks, maybe 5 days, 5 weeks. This time around, we offer 4 weeks and 4 days a week, as well as, I believe, 4 hours a day, which in the past it may have been 5 hours a day. So we tried to reduce that, overall. And then extended school year, we're obligated to, right. So with extended school year, what we tried to do is, so it wouldn't impact the general fund, we tried to incorporate um, extended school year and our title funds. So it wouldn't have, any impact. Yes. Was that it? Oh, did I miss one?
The student workers for the summer?
Oh, let me speak to that.
She has an additional question.
Yeah. Oh, it's a student workers. Yeah. Again, like student workers, fall in line with our approach to programming, and while on the surface, it does seem like, well, yeah, we got all these student workers, what about our staff? I mean, these individuals are hourly. The total amount of individuals is less than 20, and we're talking about a period of about 5 weeks. So even if you take that, combined, and you combine all of them,
What's
and
the cap on that? What's their budget for
yeah,
student workers?
yeah, we actually had to reduce their budget. So you're still talking for student workers, you're still talking about under 150,000, I believe. So in that, it's not like I don't want to minimize the amount because $150,000 could be, it could be a teacher with benefits.
An ESP?
It could be. It could be, you know. And you're right to raise the point. But right or wrong, our philosophical approach to the budget, and you're right to question it, was we wanted to try to maintain um, student programming, in all forms, and that's what we did. Yeah, and with that, with the staff, what we tried our best to do with those cuts, our approach was trying to look at where we may have had surplus, which is why at least most of our cuts, or as we discussed with you, were non-tenured employees. And we looked at course section offerings as well to see, like, especially at the high school and at the middle school. That's why if you look at the salary lines, you see the largest reductions in the high school and middle school areas, because that's where we saw the biggest opportunities to consolidate, basically collapse classes. That if you have an English class with, you know, 10 students, you have another English class with, 8 students, you're in the high school, you see it, that there was an opportunity where we could collapse that section and possibly, not bring back, a teacher. So, okay, well, no problem.
Do we have any other members of the public who would like to address the community? Any more public comments?
Good afternoon. Latasha Wilson, 217 Williamson Avenue.
I'm sorry, ma'am, I need your name.
Latasha Wilson.
Tasha.
Please proceed.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Not sure if this already been addressed
Sure.
as I'm just walking in, so I apologize if you already
Of course,
answered
no problem.
it. So the governor cut our budget by 1.5 million or 1.2 million,
Yeah, very
Right.
close, yeah.
but I know that you can still request the money back. I was just inquiring if that's been done.
I don't know specifically what avenue you can request a cut in state aid.
So I work for a nonprofit,
Okay.
and I attended a meeting where the mayors were all there amongst, it was like a budget meeting, it was at NJIT, and you basically sit before the panel and basically, I don't want to say beg, but state your claim as to why you're in need of the
Right.
money. And I know for my nonprofit, we got, if not all of it, most of it back.
Well, I would think that, well, let me ask you this. As a nonprofit, are you funded by a grant?
Yes.
Okay. So in that sense, your funding source would be different. While it both comes from the state, your funding source would be different, than ours, because our state aid is not necessarily comprised of a grant like it would be for a nonprofit. We do have grant funds in our budget, but it's mostly from federal grants that are, disseminated by the state. And that would basically be like our title funds, and you can even say our preschool funds as well. But for our general operating budget, um, 80% of that budget, almost split equally, comes from state aid and the tax levy. Yeah. So, with that said, I think maybe the different funding sources, makes that, difficult.
I know during the last meeting, you said enrollment was low. So if enrollment should increase, what would happen to the budget then?
Well, if we have a significant increase in enrollment, while I can't necessarily predict the future, but what I can say is that enrollment drives state aid because it's based on per pupil allocation. So if we have a significant increase in enrollment, then the expectation, would be that we would have an increase in state aid. So with the decrease in enrollment over the past 2 years, that's the reason why our state aid, has, yeah, but at least in terms of decrease in state aid, while we had at least $2.3 million reduction over those past 2 years, because over the past 2 years, I know she just said three,
Mhm.
but at least two of those years, we've been hit with that reduction in state aid, to reflect
Is
that.
the reduction in
The
enrollment,
consecutive years. Thank you.
is the reduction in enrollment due to school performance, or the kids are just like aging out and growing out of Hillside?
That's a good question. Yeah, it could definitely be a myriad of things. One thing that we do see visibly is at least part of our reduction, is due to out of district placements. We have an increase in out of district placements. We have an increase of charter school enrollment, over consecutive years, into charter schools like, like KIPP, North Star, and a couple of others. But, and while it's a myriad of things, we can at least point to that as a contributing factor. Mhm.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Thank you.
Do we have any more public comments? There being none, do I have a motion to close public comments?
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your comments and your concerns. Well, actually, just ladies. As this is a special meeting, I do want to give equal time to the board members as I did in the last meeting, because as I said before, and I do want to lead with this to each and every one of you tonight, we are also learning here as you are. And at the end of the day, we are not just your elected board members, we are your neighbors and we're residents, and this affects us too. So that said, each and every one of our board members, you do have a right and I would say there's an obligation to speak your mind here and now, because I know there are a host of questions and concerns you have either, so I'll open the floor. I do want to lead with this, and then I'm going to open the floor to my colleagues. We find ourselves in a very difficult position, ladies and gentlemen, tonight, because this does not come easy. Many of us have toiled with this since our last meeting, particularly when it comes to cuts and rescissions, because there's some of you we've gotten to know, and people who've done the job and done it well and contributed to this district. People who have created outcomes. These numbers are tied to human beings, and that is not lost on us. And we find ourselves in the unenviable position of trying to decide on what was, what is, and the potential of what will be. So I'd ask that you give us a little bit of grace and consideration as we try to navigate these waters just as you are. That said, to my colleagues, have any comments or questions?
I have a question.
Ms. Horton Givens.
I know that last week when we discussed the reductions to get us to the 6%, tax increase, where did we start? Where were we at before you got us down to that 6%? Like, was it 12%,
Oh, yeah, we were at 10%.
10%?
Yes.
And what, other than the potential risks, reduction in staff, in programming, I believe you said, just because I don't know if this group was able to experience hearing that as well, um, that went into the reductions to get us down to that 6%. And I'll ask one more question. I know that you also mentioned that you could potentially, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, potentially get us to 4%. Is that as a result of the charter school not being included, or is that even with the charter school being included, that $4 million?
Okay, I'll answer that question first since
Okay.
that one's fresh on my mind. So that would be without the charter school, because the charter school by itself represents a $4.37 million hit against the budget. And we've tried, and this budget does include the charter school, whether or not they're here or not, we have to include them. And, so to get us down, to where we were, previously, that's what went into this. So with the myriad of cuts that we had to do, we were, yeah. So that's it. To answer your question, that's what it is. So with the 4% that I was saying, while it would still be challenging to our budget if there were no charter school, because we have a structural deficit of $4+ million, it's at least, conceivable that it's possible to reduce the levy without the charter school. But with the charter school, it makes it nearly impossible because I mean we've, at that point, the well, let me say it this way: it makes it impossible with the approach that we've taken to draft the budget, and the approach that we've taken to draft the budget is the least amount of impact on student programming. That was one of the approaches, that we've taken. And the other approach was to not close schools. So that was something that we try our hardest to do. And even with the cuts, we targeted some of the grade levels that the charter school would potentially be drawing from, you know. So that went into our philosophy to, like I said, to not cut any schools because we believe that in any community that you have, a last resort is cutting schools because of the impact that it has, on the families, on the students, and on the community overall.
I believe that last week, my colleague, board member Beth, asked the question, and this may not have been a question, but I believe she did ask, relative to, I think I lost the question. Worst case scenario, if right now we have not received notification relative to that charter school. So at this point, we have to make sure that we're including, it's mandatory that we include that $4 million within our
Yes.
budget, correct?
It is mandatory, yes. Yep. If it wasn't mandatory, I would not have included it. But it is in fact mandatory. If we didn't include that in our budget and passed a budget, our budget would not have been approved at the county level.
And if we received, and this is a redundant question as well from last week, but just for the purpose of our community here,
Sure.
if we do receive notification that the charter school has not been approved, we still have to move. There's no changes that we can make to this budget. Once we put it in and send to the state, that's it. It has to remain intact, right?
You see, the part of the challenge is timing, because right now, today is the 13th. we're supposed to, all these changes that we have in the resolution, we have to upload this into the budget software by the 14th. And the reason why is because at that point, that's when the township is supposed to certify the tax levy. Now, how they go about doing that, if they do it exactly on the 14th, that part I really have no idea about. So they once they certify, the tax levy, if we get to June and let's say that there is no charter school, now with that, there's a couple things. One, if there's no charter school by the time we get to the 30th, and they've already certified the tax levy, at that point, that money is ours as a district. That $4+ million, we don't have to disseminate that to the charter school. Now, with respect to, let's say, our budget and things that we didn't include in our budget, like programming that we had to cut or some things, it's possible to bring some of those things back. The issue that's unknown that I don't know is how that works with the tax levy. That's the part I don't know. I do know that if there is no approval by June 30th, that if they're denied, then that money, because the township, like they did, they disperse that money to us. So and then with the charter schools, the way that works is we pay on a schedule throughout the year. So we give them bi-monthly payments over the course of an entire year. So because we would already know before June 30th, at that point, there is no payment we would have to make to that new charter school. So then, yeah, that money is ours and we can, do things with the budget. But like the tax levy question that you asked about the like 6 to 4, I honestly don't know like how that part would be addressed.
Is it something that you can
Inquire about?
inquire about?
We could certainly, maybe it's a question for the tax assessor. It's probably a question at the municipal level, I guess. And we certainly can inquire about it.
Yeah,
If I can tag team really quickly
Sure.
from on Ms. Horton-Givens' point, you mentioned that there's a deadline of tomorrow, the 14th. How much wiggle room do we have precisely? Let's just say for argument's sake, we are at an impasse tonight. How much wiggle room do we have from the 14th, given the fact that you said that there's a 30th deadline?
We don't, because that's a deadline that's given to us. Like that's not like something that we have like a target date for. So we don't. Like I think the wiggle room was when last week, when the budget didn't approve and then it came to this week, that was our wiggle room. So from today until tomorrow when we have to upload the budget, yeah, we don't have the wiggle room on that part. Because if let's say there's hypothetically a denial of the budget, if there's a denial of the budget, then there is no budget to upload. So at the county level, the budget software will not be uploaded. We can't make the changes, and then that will set in motion a chain of events where then the state will get involved. So to that question, the wiggle room that we had is gone. We don't really have it, unfortunately.
Going back to Ms. Horton-Givens.
But to your point,
Yeah, and then with that, if the state does decide to come in, there are two things that could happen, because I did mention that there could be a state monitor that they would send, and that would be a six-figure salary that would be at the expense of the district, money that we don't have. That's the first thing. So that's an option that they could do. The other option, I actually just learned today when I spoke with the county BA about it, is that the other thing that could be done in lieu of a state monitor, the state can just unilaterally just, like the levy that's already there, just approve the budget with that. They could do that also if they don't send in a state monitor.
Levy meaning what? Could you clarify?
The tax levy.
At what percentage? Could you clarify?
No, that what's ever in the budget. Like what's like, yeah, yeah.
At your proposed 6%.
Yeah. So it's more about, in that instance, it's more about the proposed budget. Like they wouldn't, that it's more about the proposed budget at that point. Whether it's 4%, whether it's 6%, whatever's in that budget, they could unilaterally just approve it as is without sending in the state monitor. So that's the other option.
Ms. Whitten, giving you something
Oh,
further.
And I'm sorry, one more, and then I'll let you go. Sorry. So to your point, relative to sending in a state monitor, I believe that our board attorney also consulted us, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, relative to this last week, that if we do not pass the budget tonight, they could potentially
yeah, that's
send in a
right. And that, like I said, it could get to that level, or they could just unilaterally just approve the budget as it is. But yes, those options, would be on the table, and I'm presenting them as options because I can't say definitively what the state will do. I'm only speaking to what was communicated to me by the county BA of the options that the state has at their disposal.
Thank you.
Sure.
Ms. Best?
Good evening.
Good evening.
2 questions. I think last week you stated that they were at stage 2 or is it stage 3 with the.
Stage 2.
So is that still the same? You still haven't
Yes.
heard anything further?
We still haven't heard anything further. They're at stage 2 in the application process, and
And by the 30th of June.
that's the latest. It could be
Deadline.
before the 30th of
Yeah.
June, but that is the deadline that the state has to give a decision by. Hopefully, they won't drag it out to the 30th of June, but they've been dragging their feet already, so we have to prepare for the possibility.
Okay. My next question is, so what happens next year budget year if these cuts and potential tax increases are approved? Will the current deficit that we are currently in, will that be gone? And what are the chances of us falling into this again? And I ask because every year, they state that you can do up to, what is it, like 2%, right?
Yes.
And we have not done that in the past. And I've been on the board 7 years now, whatever. And I know that there's been a lot of 0%. And I'm asking because if we do this year, like if it's approved, these tax cuts,
Yes.
and then tax increases.
Yeah, tax increases, yes.
And then next year comes, if we don't do the 2% or whatever that max is, I mean, would we fall back into kind of where we are right
No.
now?
No.
And I'm just asking because I know there are a lot of different districts that, it sounds great, 0%, but then the state doesn't necessarily see it as something beneficial. And I'm not saying that I live here, I pay
Right.
taxes,
Yeah.
we all do, we all are dealing with the same thing. But we have to really figure out what's gonna work down the line because we can't just keep putting like Band-Aids over this every 2, 3, 4 years, no, and then we come with a big 6, 8, 10% tax increase. So I'm just asking right now with this $4 million deficit that we're in, if these things are approved, where will we be next year?
That's a good question.
How do we stay stable?
Right. I'll speak to that part. So with regard to the 2%, and you mentioned, kind of what's happened in the past without, having, of having 0% levy in your budget, increase in your budget. So next year, how could I put this? It's not optional, if that makes sense. So I know in the past there have been budgets presented where I guess this has maybe been presented to you as a board and to you as a community that we can do an increase this year, maybe not do an increase next year. That's not fiscally responsible. To that point, in my position as the business administrator, it would be fiscally irresponsible for me to present a budget without the 2% levy. So I can tell you right now that yes, at minimum, next year the budget will have a 2% levy at minimum, because you also spoke to a point of stability, which is, and I'm glad you brought that up, because as we talked about during the last presentation, think about it. Our, you know, our increase on the taxes, and while I don't minimize it, 2% on the levy that we have is roughly six plus $100,000, right? So if you take increases with respect to healthcare costs by itself, that's $1 million. That already, just that alone already exceeds what we get from the 2% levy. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. We talk about, as I mentioned to Ms. Lawler earlier, when we talked about the salary increases, talking another $1 million+, out of cost tuition increases, you know, there were decisions made with regard to building modular units at 2 schools, you know, and those payments combined for those 2 buildings, one will be a final payment, and the other will be in the second year. And those 2 payments combined are, $1 million plus. So the point that I'm trying, and I could go on and on with the list of increases, but they dwarf the 2%
Yeah.
levy that we get. So to that point, like there's no way that you reach stability by saying that we're not gonna apply the 2% levy. And I know it may sound rough, but as in my position as well as your position as board members, we have a responsibility, to our, constituents, to the community at large, to the students, to ensure that we put forth our best effort to put a budget that ensures stability. So we don't end up, as you kind of alluded to, in the papers where we have, where we're, in the hole for, like I read something about Montclair, $20 million. Hasbrook Heights, no, was it Hasbrook Heights? Forgive me. Yeah, yeah, like they're like $25 million, and it's like, and we can go on and on with what we're,
Yeah, no, I understand. I just wanted
yeah,
to, and I'm doing this just because not to make us look bad, but I want people to really
yes,
understand the severity of this and what happens when certain things don't occur. And I think that from last week's presentation and just conversations that we've had, that you, acting superintendent, both are like looking at all aspects of what we need, what we can utilize, and how we can compound them so that we still can have a good education to our students. And unfortunately, that means that cuts will happen, and it's horrible. No one wants to go through this. I think that the way that you all are looking at it is the fairest that you can do at this point with what we have to work with. So that's all. I just wanted. I'm not trying to put you on the
oh
spot.
no, I figured that's where you're going with it. I
Be
appreciate you
open
for
and
that.
honest with everybody to understand what we're doing and
Yes,
how
no,
we can be better and maintain.
and I appreciate you for bringing out that question so the public can have a better understanding.
I made to that point,
Sure.
and Ms. Segwahidi, I'll do that to Ms. Best's point. I don't want to oversimplify this as well, because we're hitting on some things, but there are also, we need to make it very clear to the public, there are a myriad of mitigating factors. One of the things that I think was not addressed fully in our last presentation, and you can quote me if I got you wrong, is the valuations in this township
Mhm.
have been less than 1%
Yes, I did say that.
over
Yes.
the course of how many years?
I only did the valuation from the prior year to this year because that was based on what we get from the tax assessor.
Mm.
So just Dr. Howard's point
And I have
from,
3 more behind
yeah,
it.
go ahead, sure. I'll let
Oh,
you
no,
answer.
I have 3 more. Answer that. I'll answer in
Oh,
turn.
okay. Yeah, so I think that what Dr. Howard is bringing up with the evaluations in the community of the homes collectively, that part of the reason why the community feels this a little bit more at the individual level than maybe in another community is because valuations of all of the homes and residences in a community typically increase anywhere from 2 to 4% on average and year over year. And in Hillside, that increase was less than 1%, which means that that is significantly below the valuation increase. So that valuation went up from about 912 million. I'm sorry. Yeah, 912 million to roughly 915 million. And the issue with that, why he brings that up as a point, is because what that does is it one illustrates that there's not a lot of development that's occurring in the town. And two, the benefit of the development is that the tax burden is shared across the community, across the town. But instead, you're getting increases not just from the district, but from the township where you feel it more because it's spread, it's still only concentrated like among the same people. There's no new development that's occurring where you're spreading that tax levy increase. You're going to feel the impact of this more, which is the reason why when we broke down like how much this costs at an individual level, on an average home, we said that this would probably be, roughly about 1,000 plus a year. That we didn't try to insult anyone's intelligence and say that and break it down by the day and say, oh, this is the equivalent of a cup of coffee and try to make it light because it's concrete numbers and you feel this all the same.
Secondly, you said that we have not heard from the state. It seems that there's an inverse relationship that they have until the 30th to determine whether it's going to be a charter school, but yet we have to make a decision with a gun to our heads.
Yes.
So at what juncture do we speak out? Do we speak out to our legislators? And if we have need to do that, why have we not done so before now? Now it's the 11th hour and we're all under the gun. Can we speak to that?
Sure. I could speak only to what I know of. And what I do know of is that, and I include you in this as well, that our board president, our superintendent, other members of the community, have tried as best as they can the channels that they believe that they have access to speak to whatever politicians that they may have access to try to get answers and have been met with roadblocks. On my part, the most logical person that I could speak to is the county business administrator because that person would be the one that would have access to the state officials, and I think that there have been, like I said, there have been, people on our board, our superintendent, members of the community that have been trying to get answers. So it's not like I don't want to paint the narrative that no one has been trying to get answers, but they have been. And unfortunately, they've just been, met with roadblocks by bureaucracy and whatever else that may be preventing us from, getting these answers. Because it is unfair, and your analogy is spot on. Like it does feel like that where we have to do something under duress and under a certain degree of, force.
Thirdly, could you explain to the public, you discussed it briefly, in the best terms we can in just simplistic terms, the concept of the bank cap and where the surplus is and has gone?
Yeah, so and just to clarify that, because I did clarify that at the last meeting, that we do have bank cap. We did not use it in this budget, but I will explain what bank cap is, and I will explain what we did use in the budget to contribute to the tax increase. So what bank cap is Ms. Bess had mentioned that there were years when the district, attempted to forego not increasing the tax levy by 2%. So what the state does is the state says, well, we think you're going to need this money. So we'll hold it for you. This is the concept of bank cap. So we have expiring bank cap of nearly $1.5 million that expires this year and another $1 million next year. Those, while we were at liberty to use that in the budget without a vote from the township, we did not use that in our budget. We originally had it slated in our budget, at least a year of it. But what ended up happening is that the state made the decision to, what they do is there are certain waivers that they prioritize over others. So the waiver that they prioritize based on our health insurance increase was the healthcare waiver. That healthcare waiver, same thing in terms of what it allows you to do with the tax levy. It allows you to raise the tax levy without, additional voter approval. So that increase, that waiver was about a $1.2+ million increase. You take that plus the 6% of 600 plus, and you get to roughly 1.9+ million, which represents the 6% increase in the overall tax levy. So that's how we got here.
Last question, then I'll defer to Ms. Egwahidi. Can you give me a scenario of what the response of what it would look like? Should we reduce the proposed tax levy to 4%, keeping the charter school in the model, in the wind, so to speak? What would that look like?
Well, okay, just to be clear, as I said before, with the charter school, without closing the school or additional cuts, there's no 4% option. Now, there is no charter school, and if there is no charter school and we did have to go 4%, then at that point, what will you be talking about is, instead of 1,000 plus per year annually, we will be looking more at about nearly $700 annually. So that would be the difference of 4%. So on a monthly basis, as I mentioned before, the reduction in tax levy means different things to the community versus what it means to the district. So for the community, what it means is that on average, each percentage increase is probably a reduction of about $15 per month in the increases in your taxes. So at 6%, if you're at about a monthly of nearly $90 and you reduce that by another 30, now you're at almost $60 a month, which results in the nearly $700 annually. Now in a school district, for us, that 2% is $600+ thousand. That's what that is to us. So, and obviously it's less for the taxpayers because it's spread across a larger amount of people. And I'm not saying that I'm not making light of going from 6 to 4% and trying to say that, well, it's only, possibly a $300 difference in your taxes annually, because annually that would be a 30% reduction in the amount of tax increase. But on the school districts, then, like I said, that's $600,000 plus. And when you're talking those numbers, hundreds of thousands of dollars, you're talking multiple staff members. you're talking programs. That's what's at stake for us with that reduction. So just wanted to make that clear to get both sides of it. Thank you for the question.
Ms. Equity, then Mr. Shapiro.
Yeah, thank you very much. My question is probably more for a clarification. The last meeting we had, there was a mention of a 2% every year as an alternative part to getting us off the deficit, because you had mentioned that if we're going to go 2% every year, that eventually we'll get out of the deficit. Do you know how long this will take to get out of it? If we went 2%, that is without the charter school.
Okay, so without the charter school,
Because you had, because you had mentioned, I made a note because
yes,
during the conversation, you had mentioned the 2% every year moving forward as an
right.
alternative part that we could go with without the charter school, of course.
Yes, without the charter school.
Yes.
Yeah, so in that scenario, it would it's difficult to try to forecast that. And the reason why is because if I'm just looking at it like, okay, this is the structural budget deficit of this amount. This is the amount that we get from the tax levy over X amount of years, right? The challenge with looking at it that way, even if I did it in a linear fashion where I modeled this, and we said that over the next, let's say, 6 years at the 2% levy, we're probably roughly around $4 million, which is about the equivalent of our structural budget deficit. The problem is that our expenses rise by more than 2% annually. And that's the challenge with trying to put together that forecast. So in order to do it, it would be in addition to the increase in the tax levy, we would probably be, looking at what are some of the things that, potentially that we can cut, like are there maybe additional routes on transportation that maybe we can do without? Like, are we, maybe it's courtesy busing on the table now, like what would be the additional expenditures that could be removed, from the budget? And that's the challenge, with that. So to try to do the model that you're suggesting.
So that's the model you had suggested.
Well, I mean,
that you made
yeah,
mention
like
of.
yes, it'd be a best guess. It'd be a best guess. Could I say it with certainty? Probably not, but it would be a best guess, you know? But like I said, you would have to include all of the different obligations that we have and how they've increased over time. But either way, with that, I still would say that that is the most responsible path to that we don't take off any years of, just applying our normal levy increase. Because when you take off years doing that, now we're here, at the end. And because eventually it, kind of comes to a head where no increase, no increase, no increase. And now you have all of these obligations you have to meet. Now we have to make cuts. So
So from what you're saying now, you just mentioned that the 2% does not cover your operational cost or whatever, and there might be increases. So are you saying that there will be more rifting? You already did a whole bunch of rifting. So is there going to be another wave? I mean, what's the...
you mean like in subsequent
I'm
years?
just saying. I'm just saying.
There's, could be, I could be. It's something that we really have to look at because the thing is that to put it simply, you either have to raise revenue or you have to cut expenditures, or you have to do a combination of both. In this budget, we did a combination of both. So that's the simplest way that I can put it with respect to the math, that if our revenue only increases 2% and everything else around us is increasing more than 2%, then we need more money and we need less expenses. That's the most honest answer I can give.
One more, my last question for you.
Sure.
And my question would be that, according to the precedent, we have like a time, a clock is ticking, that we need to do some kind of submission. So my question is, now you did mention that we have 6%. If we don't, if the budget does not go through, they could send in someone to do it. Is it the state could do it for us and go with what we already have as a tentative budget at 6%? So will it be smart to reduce the percentage now, because we never know where it's going to fall, because we are shooting for 6%, 6%, 6%. But I'm just saying.
Sure, fair question. And the answer to that is no. And the reason why the answer to that is no is because at this point, in order to, we've made all the cuts that we believe that we can make. You know, we've already cut a fair amount of staff. At this point, if we're talking more reduction, you know, to the levy, now we're getting to the point where we have to try to find more programs to cut or more curriculum to cut. Like, we were careful not to cut any curricular programs, you know, like, right. Like, I felt like ELA, like, you know, whatever curricular programs we have, ELA, math, social studies, science, very careful to make sure that there were no cuts to those programs, because we believe that when the budget is the fiscal translation of the district's strategic priorities. The priority of the district has to be students first. Has to be. The moment we start cutting curricular programs, we're going back on that. We're saying that we're not students first. Right or wrong?
Asbestos.
This should be a fairly quick question. We discussed the modular units at Herd and Liquor,
And Deanna Taylor, yes.
which Deanna Taylor, that's complete.
We have one. If you're right, it is complete, but we have one more payment.
But Herd and Liquor.
Herd and Liquor hasn't started.
So if we're saying there's a decrease in enrollment, is that just generally the district or specifically a school? Because what I'm asking is where's that fund? Where are the funds coming for that? And
Continue, I'm sorry.
if we're cutting staff, what,
Yeah.
you know, have we thought about that and how?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. You know, Herd and Liquor, I don't know how we arrived at doing this modular unit, considering that of all the elementary schools, Herd and Liquor is the least populated. So I'm sorry, Deanna Taylor is the least populated. So I don't know how this arrived at a decision to build modular units for the least popular school.
Are we
in
too
the
deep
district.
into that
Yeah.
we can't?
Yeah, Herd and Liquor,
feel like-
we're in the final payment of Herd and Liquor. I'm sorry, please forgive me. It's late. Deanna Taylor, we're in the final payment of Deanna Taylor this year, next budget year. And we're in the second payment of Herd and Liquor this coming budget year. So in terms of walking them back, if let's just say this, if that was something that we could get out of that contractual obligation, then that probably,
Yeah.
yeah, that would have probably been first thing on the table.
Just making sure, because I know that people are thinking.
Yeah, like how we did. Yeah, of course. I
So I
mean,
just want us to,
you're absolutely right. Like how we building more space if enrollment is decreasing. I mean, I get it. I do.
we're kind
Yeah.
of active with, just
Yes.
wanted that to be out there, but
Yes.
thank you.
Mhm.
Mr. Shapiro?
Good evening. Thank you again, Mr. McNeil, and
Sure.
to the acting superintendent, Perez, as well, for all the work that you've done. Greatly appreciate it. A couple of questions. This one, I think I'm a little embarrassed to ask because it's somewhat elementary. On Friday, May 8th, we received a public agenda notice that appears different than the public agenda notice that has been circulated here tonight. What exactly are we voting on tonight? 2 items or 1 item?
The finance agenda is the same, so that hasn't changed. I think what's changed is the labor component.
We clarify that then before we. No? Yeah? I mean, right, what was circulated on Friday had 2 components. What was circulated just now has 1 component. So
Yes.
what's the what? And they're inextricably linked as well, right?
They are
Like,
inextricably
the
linked.
budget and whatever we're doing in labor.
They are inextricably linked. You are correct. Oh, I thought you was about to tell me something.
Mr. Shapiro, have anything further? Who has answered that? You're still waiting for the response.
Ask 1 question.
Yeah, that's one question. What's the other question?
You didn't get a response.
Not that I'm aware of.
No,
I mean,
they
I
were,
could have missed it.
no, the difference is that the labor agenda was removed.
So we're not voting on the labor agenda, or we are voting on a labor agenda tonight? We are voting on a labor agenda tonight.
Yes. Yeah.
When might we or the humans here?
We will clarify that in executive session.
Yeah, should we do that and then resume any other conversation out here?
I would think that we can do that if there's nothing further. Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of things further, but I don't even know what I would have to say about anything if I don't know what we're doing here tonight. I mean, maybe everybody else does.
Well, yeah,
I don't. I can't speak
oh,
for
the-
anybody,
the-
but I walked into this thinking that the public agenda that was circulated on Friday was the agenda we were voting on. Apparently, that's not the case, which may be fine, but I don't know what else I might consider important to discuss here with regards to the budget if I don't know what its other half is, right? Because the 2 are inextricably linked, right? The budget for next year and the RIFs or not RIFs, or however that works, or whatever our labor agenda is, I understood them to go hand in hand. So maybe there are other questions I don't know yet. I thought that was the elementary question. I didn't realize I was stepping on something.
No, actually, that's
No.
a valid question.
Yeah,
If
it's a
I may.
valid question.
And to that point, Mr. Shapiro, I think it wise at this juncture for us to explain the overarching reason why we are all here and why we've had to reconvene. I don't want to step on this, I want to just get into the nuts and bolts of this, but I'm going to ask Mr. Hammond, would you mind explaining exactly why we had to return in terms of the voting process?
Yeah, first of all, my understanding is the labor agenda is the exact same agenda, right? There are tenured individuals that may be subject to a RIF. There are non-tenures that would be subject to non-renewals. Non-renewals are within the purview of the superintendent, acting superintendent, chief administrator. They don't require board action, but they are contained within the budget. So because the vote didn't pass for the budget, it was requested to reconvene today so that you have an opportunity to reconsider the budget, because the budget contains essentially the positions that are the subject of the non-renewals as well as the subject of the reductions in force.
I'm sorry. That part I understood. What I don't understand is the agendas we were handing are not the same?
That was your card.
Same. They just didn't give you the labor agenda this evening, but it's the same exact.
Yes, that is correct.
So the labor agenda that we're voting on is what was circulated on Friday, May 8th?
It's a yes or no.
But it's the same resolution from last week.
Yeah, it's the same resolution.
Why is
Those
it
haven't
not here?
changed.
They have it. They just forgot to provide it to you today, but it's the same agenda.
But we do have it.
So, is it right
Okay,
here?
so then why
It's
all
right
the-
here. It's right here.
What's all the sketchiness about?
It's not.
I think to be in all transparency, Mr. Shapiro, I think there was a faux pas on somebody's part in that.
That's fine. That's okay, but we just made it into a 10-minute thing that just, all we had to say was, oh no, it's right here and we're handing it out. It was all this cloak and dagger. We're going to talk about an executive session. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. Changes. There's not changes. There's quiet. Guilt. I just asked the question about the paper's not here. If the paper's not here and it is now here, then that's fine. And it's the same as what was circulated.
It's the same as what was
And
circulated.
nothing has changed.
Nothing has
Underline.
changed.
Okay, so that leads to my second question. Last week we met and the budget didn't pass.
Yes.
And now we're meeting again and nothing has changed. But we're expecting the votes to change. Is that what this reconvening was about? I just want to say again,
Yeah, sure.
last week we met.
Mhm.
We were here till almost 11 p.m.
Yes.
The budget didn't pass.
Yes.
And even the labor part, I believe, didn't get a majority of
It did
present and
not.
voting.
Yes.
And what we just established was that nothing changed.
That is correct.
Okay, but we're expecting the people to have changed their votes.
Well, to be clear, not every board member voted.
No, I understand the difference between abstention and voting yes and voting no. That I understand. I also understand that one member wasn't here who is currently present. Another member wasn't here and is currently absent as well. My question just is that what we were expecting for those positions as they were, the votes or the non-votes to change? Because the substance hasn't, correct?
So when you voted last week, the reason why it didn't pass is because it didn't have a majority vote of the full board membership. There were 5 votes, needed either to pass it or if you wanted to have 5 votes to deny it. But either way, we didn't have the requisite votes of the full membership,
Correct.
which was 5 votes. So tonight, whether you pass the budget or not, this is the opportunity for the board to have the requisite votes to demonstrate their full,
So we're looking for people to
representation of
change
the
their
budget.
position, so the substance hasn't.
Oh, I can't say what we're looking for. I can only say that
But nothing has changed.
nothing has changed. That's the only thing that I can say. Nothing has changed.
We haven't tried to do something else
Nope.
to
Nope,
amend
nothing
this
has
in any-
changed. Yes.
that non-intended. That's
That's
fine, but
precisely what-
abstentions could be abstentions also. That's part of the system.
Hi, can I make a comment?
Sure.
Kind of rough in here. So anyway, I just want to thank you guys publicly for doing the presentation, being very transparent, and being transparent with the community, students, faculty, staff, whatever the case may be. Just going back to, I think this is a second opportunity for us to vote on the budget per se, what you're trying to say. I guess pounding it down, being blunt as possible, but also not having the state coming in and still making cuts. So I think, being more fiscally responsible when it comes to the budget, but also hounding down on the 6%. It is going to go up on everyone's taxes per se. Imagine working in higher ed and being level funded for 5 years. You don't get that. But also, if we don't get the charter school, what you're saying is the money is coming to us and we're able to put it in different things that we want to put in for the district. Of course, put our students first, but also let's say possibly bringing back some people, correct? And you never,
Possibly.
right, you never want to send the state back money. Because if you send the state back money, you will not get money from the state. You will not see that money again, right? So I get the whole 4%, I get the 5%, I get the 6%, right? But I feel like I think everyone is not everyone, but I feel like, you know, a lot of people have their own personal opinions, their feelings, stuff like that. But I think in the forefront, the students should come first. And it's basically me coming from this district as a student. The programs that they have now, I didn't have it going to high school, going to the middle school, right? So keeping the students first, like I understand it's hard out here, jobs, insurance, but I think that just being more responsible like you are trying to do per se. I'm not blaming past administration. I'm not blaming 6 years ago because I wasn't here, right? Or in college. But what I'm saying is that I think people should be open-minded per se to certain things. And I get we don't want to make cuts, but we're not the district that is closing 3 to 4 schools. We're not the district that's in $20 million in debt. We're not the district that's on the news right now. And I think we don't need that now, right? So I could be wrong. I'm probably voicing my personal opinion. I'm not being biased to anyone's opinion at all, but I feel like we're losing the train of thought. when we keep here.
Thank you, Ms. Parks.
Thank you, Ms. Parks. Do we have any other board members before we?
Yeah, I just had another question.
Sure.
Is what's contained in this resolution a complete budget? These lines that
No. What you're looking at in the resolution is that I explained this at the last meeting.
changes, right?
Right. It's just the changes.
So,
The budget that was submitted, that budget is online. You can't post the final budget online until we actually have a final budget approved, which is the reason why there is no final budget online and there's no final budget presentation online that I presented last week because we don't have an approved budget.
what we saw last week in the slides wasn't the full budget.
The amount
Top-line
was the
summary of a
full
summary.
budget.
Therein lies the sticking.
I'm saying it was the top line summary of a summary. It wasn't an in-depth budget. The budget's probably this big.
Oh, if you mean the budget itself, the line by line item budget,
Correct.
then yeah. But we only, yeah,
That's the question.
yeah, right. No,
So no one here has actually seen that, correct? Meaning the members of this board have
No.
seen that actual budget. We've seen the top line summary that was presented to the public. I just want to make clear,
yeah, sure.
to-
And we have a lot. We have the line by line item budget here.
I
If
understand
you want to have that,
you have not yet had access to that, correct? We haven't been given,
yeah,
we
that's
haven't
correct.
reviewed that. We haven't
That's correct.
discussed that in committee or anything, correct?
That is correct.
Make sure that when I face the public, they understand.
Sure. Did you have any additional questions?
So many.
No, it has
And now is probably the time to ask if you
I
have
do.
them.
I do. Why don't we have it? Because we
requested.
requested.
Before
So what you, what?
does
Yeah.
that line by line item include staff, like personal information per se?
No, it doesn't include personal information. It's a line by line budget, which is because generally to give you a line by line item budget is not as useful than providing the top level analysis of the budget. If you're going to look at the lines and say, okay, well, you know, you're looking at hundreds of lines in a budget. This budget is, like you said, this thick. And if that's what you want to make a decision, that probably in and of itself, without the top level analysis of the budget, probably doesn't work. Because the truth is, like, you know, what would you be looking at without the top level analysis of it? I think that's
Well,
the
that's
reason
what
why
you-
we have
That's why you were there.
like when you have presentations, generally in a budget presentation, I don't think you go to a budget presentation and someone puts a 40-page budget on the screen. That's generally not how that works. I don't think I've ever seen that in a school district because no one would understand that. But what they do understand is they understand the amount of revenues that are associated with the budget. They understand the amount of expenditures that are associated with the budget and that top level analysis. That's why that's generally shown in a presentation.
I would take caution with that though, because I don't want to underestimate what the public would understand.
So
No,
I didn't mean any
not
disrespect.
and I don't mean
Yeah, I didn't mean any
manner,
disrespect.
um, this is kind of like what's requested. It's kind of if you're looking at your checkbook ledger. But that's something I think is what you're kind of alluding to, Mr. Shapiro. Would I be offset if I said that?
You and I have discussed the absence of information. We've discussed it multiple times.
And I just want to add to that. We not only did we ask for a line by line, we asked for the top level analysis. So I think that they will complement each other, whether it's perceived that we would understand it or not. I think the mere fact that we asked for it and
Fair enough.
didn't get a response that was what you were considering is, I think that's where my concern is. You have to be able to provide us with information so we can make informed decisions. It's our responsibility to be able to do that. And quite honestly, last week, I'm not very happy with the decision that I made. For whatever reason, we have the opportunity to come back now and make a decision. But without having all of the facts, it is unacceptable for us as board members to be asked to make decisions without having the pertinent information. Let us decide.
That's fair.
Let us
I don't
decide
disagree
if
with
it's too much or not enough, right? And then we can, but don't decide for us because that is our right. And I will say that the last 5 years, 6 that I've been on the board, that has, and I know that you haven't been here all of those years, that has been a consistent theme. I like for us to change it.
That's
I
fair.
like for us to change it
Okay.
because we deserve to have that information so that we can make better decisions. It's about our scholars. It's about our community. We are a part of the community. A 6% increase is not only going to impact those that are in the audience, those that are on, social media watching, it will also impact myself. I live here. I pay almost $15,000 in taxes. So I know. And I want to be able to have the information so that I can make better decisions, right, wrong, or indifferent.
That's fair.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
I appreciate your comment.
Thank you, Ms. Horton-Gibbons. And I think that kind of brings us succinctly to the point. If we go back and just look at last week's meeting, my colleagues have all spoken well and just spoken directly to where we were going with it. The reason why we asked that is because this stuff is what? It's public information. And we are the public. We are the public. And again, it's not a knock. I guess this is all new. It's a learning process, but going forward, we definitely need to take this as a learning opportunity. They say when you know better, you do better.
Agreed.
But we're in the trenches of this now, so we're going to have to operate with what we have in hand. And I think that's where some of the reticence is coming in, is that all of us are making a 100% decision based on 70% of information. And that's a difficult thing to do. That said, if there's nothing further, I don't want to belabor this process or the evening. So if there's nothing further, do I have a motion to go into executive session?
Motion.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Be it resolved pursuant to the Open Public Meetings Act that the Board of Education meeting closed executive session at this time to discuss matters relating to, but not limited to, personnel pending or anticipated litigation, labor negotiations, contract negotiations, particular student attorney-client privilege. And the board will reconvene in public session at the conclusion of the closed session. The matters discussed in closed session will be disclosed to the public as soon as the need for confidentiality no longer exists. Thank you for your patience. Hopefully we'll be back to you quickly. If you need a bio break or a water break, now's a good time.